Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Today I'm going to be starting my series on the Pathfinder 2nd Edition Age of Ashes adventure path. This is the inaugural adventure path for the Pathfinder 2nd Edition role-playing game and takes place over the course of 6 different installments that take the players all the way from 1st level up through 20th. I'll be looking at each chapter individually, and today we're going to begin with the very first adventure, Age of Ashes, number 1 of 6, Hellknight Hill. Hellknight Hill is the first installment of the Age of Ashes storyline, which takes the players' characters from brand new, fresh, first level characters all the way up to level 5 characters. Now this video is going to contain some spoilers. I will try to keep spoilers as light as possible, but it's just going to be unavoidable when discussing this adventure path as a whole. The brand new characters begin their adventure making their way to the town of Breach Hill. Breach Hill is a town with a sort of mysterious past, or very unusual past and unusual founding. I'm not going to talk about it too much in this video. All that I'll say is that the town was founded by a group of amnesiacs who just found themselves suddenly all in this area at the same time. And their construction of Breach Hill was helped along by a mage adventurer, wizard adventurer, who helped build up the town to the point where it is now before mysteriously vanishing. Again, I'll talk more about that in a separate video because it is significant to later parts of the campaign, but it's not so much an integral part of this particular chapter. It's more of sort of a pseudo-mystery. The characters arrive in Breach Hill, which has weekly, or not weekly, but monthly meetings with the town council, where the locals will bring up their problems or any issues that they have that the town council might seek the help of adventurers for. Breach Hill being very adventurer friendly, based off having that adventuring wizard plays such an integral role in helping to found the village. The characters are in luck as they're the only adventurers to take place in this particular meeting, and there's only one matter of business to be brought up, and that is to be brought up by this articulate elderly goblin woman by the name of Warble Bumblebrasher. She is concerned that she has lost contact with the other tribe, with the rest of her tribe, the Bumblebrasher tribe, that have taken up residence in the nearby Hellknight Keep. This was a fortress that was set up by the Hellknights themselves, a lawful organization dedicated to order and the worship of Osmodius, though they're not necessarily wholly evil, at least not the way that Breach Hill really looked at them. They sort of looked at them more as authority figures before they abandoned the region some time ago. The goblins then moved in and have been residing there peacefully alongside the town pretty much ever since. Her concern is that she has lost contact with the leader of the tribe, another goblin by the name of Helba, and she's seen red smoke coming from the direction of the keep, which has historically been a distress sign or distress signal for her people. Before too much is able to get said, however, chaos erupts as fires start to engulf the town hall that the adventurers, the town council, Warble, and about 40 other citizens are all in at the time. As not only have fires been set all around the hall, but a fire method has also been summoned. This section here, this particular moment, has the characters having to not only fight the fire, fight the method, but also they are going to be required to help guide the townsfolk out. The council can get about half of the people to safety, but the characters, through diplomacy, intimidation, whatever it might be, have to guide the remaining members out. Hopefully they can get them all out before the smoke becomes too much or the fire becomes too much and gets out of control. Once everything is taken care of, or once everything unfolds, it is discovered that a halfling by the name of Kelmont is the one who was responsible for setting fire to the town hall, and he was seen fleeing in the direction of Hellknight Keep. So the town council leader, Gerta Gardania, hires the characters or seeks them out to track down not only Calmet and bring him back, hopefully alive, but also to see to what's causing the distress signal that Warble has seen, and also learn what's happened to the goblins. Which takes us to Chapter 2, The Ruined Citadel. The next couple of chapters essentially involve the player characters going through Hellknight Keep itself. As they arrive, they do see evidence that there's been some sort of cave-ins that have taken place, or collapses that have taken place that have blocked off certain areas. So, for example, right now there's no way to actually get to the lower level of the keep, as that's been completely collapsed by this cave-in that occurred. As they make their way through, they discover mostly animals that have taken up residence in this part of the keep, including some goblin dogs, a giant bat, some giant spiders, some huge, like, turtle creatures known as grave shells, and even some wargs. In addition, however, there is a bugbear thug or bugbear rogue who fancies himself to be a treasure collector, and there's actually a member of the Hell Knights currently sifting through the ruins, or the abandoned, I should say ruins, but the abandoned keep, in search of his parents' signet ring. This is Alex Steglum, and he is a member of the Order of the Nail, which is one of the sects of the Hell Knights. And even though he is one of these knights, he isn't himself actually evil. And with the right amount of diplomacy, or asking the right questions and offering things in the right way, he is willing to travel with the characters throughout the rest of this adventure, searching for, again, his family's signet ring. As they explore, they come across the main source of conflict that has taken place in this particular level of the keep. Is up on the battlements, the remaining goblins from the Bumblebrasher tribe are currently engaged in a shouting match with the halfling Calment, who has taken Helba, the tribe's leader, hostage. In addition, in the courtyard itself, below the battlements, there's this strange draconic creature sort of pacing hungrily back and forth, waiting to make a meal out of anything that falls off the battlement, or when they enter the courtyard themselves, the player characters. The standoff with Calmet can be handled in a few different ways. It could be done through diplomacy. It could be done through a combat situation. If the characters distract Calmet enough, Helba is able to escape his grasp. And again, how you deal with the fight is dependent on what the party's motivations are. If they are able to interrogate Calment, they learn that he set the fire, and he did everything that he did to sort of, in a roundabout way, get back at his employer, a half-elven woman by the name of Voz. She owns and runs the local bookstore in Breach Hill, and according to Calmet, is a very thoughtless and very uncaring employer. He actually got the scroll to summon the fire method from her private collection, and also learned that that Voz was looking to discover something by the name of Alcetta's Ring, which is a collection of elven teleportation gates that is somewhere underneath Hellknight Keep, and connects Breach Hill and the keep itself to various far away locations in the world of Galarian. So he wanted to find this information, find these gates before Voz did, and was hoping to sell that information to the highest bidder so that he could buy himself a new life far away from her. Of course, things didn't quite work out the way that he wanted it to. And again, he's either defeated or killed by the player characters, or potentially coerced into surrendering, or beaten into surrender and taken back to town to face proper justice. After this is done, the goblins, very thankful, will inform the player characters that there is actually a secret entrance in one of the nearby hills that will take the characters down to the lower level of the keep, and they will show them where this is, but they do ask that the characters clear out the rest of the keep first before they handle that information, but if pressed, they will give that to the player characters, again, out of gratitude for what they've done so far. The descent into that lower level through that secret entrance is the subject of Chapter 3, The Citadel Below, and this is where the characters come into contact with the group of cultists that have driven the goblins from these lower levels up into the upper levels before some sort of explosion occurred that caused the collapse in the cave-in that has shut down not only access to this level, but access to the level below, which is a very important level, which we'll get into in a little bit. These cultists also are very unusual for the location of Breach Hill. Many of them are these frog-like humanoids known as boggards. There's also these like baboon-like humanoids by the name of charakuras, or charakas, I believe they're called. We'll show a picture of them here. So the charakas, so yeah, these sort of exotic-looking creatures. And they are members of a cult known as the Cinder Claws. And the Cinder Claws are basically looking to secure the keep and secure the Elven teleportation gates for themselves, for their own purposes, which will become more clear as the campaign itself advances. There's some other notable encounters that take place on this level, including a run-in with these kobolds by the name of Pib and Zarf, who sort of fled from the cultists. They weren't part of the cultists themselves, but they basically sort of fled from them once they arrived, announcing themselves as dragons and that they demand all the food that the characters have because they are hungry, because they've been sort of trapped, hiding from these cultists for quite some time. What's kind of interesting about these guys is, again, diplomacy can have them ally with the player characters, and while they won't fight directly with them, they could set up traps or otherwise distract the cultists to help the player characters sort of get the drop on them. There's also an encounter in this location up here with a grizzly bear that was barricaded in from the outside by the Bumblebrasher goblins themselves. This grizzly bear by the name of Big Bumble was supposed to be the mascot of the Bumblebrasher goblins, but after he ate several of his trainers, they decided to just lock him and barricade him in that room until they could figure out something else to do with him. There's also an ossuary and burial crypt for some of the heroes of the Order of the Nail that used to reside here, as well as some undead guardians that watch over that location as well, including this pretty cool looking, just find the art here, the skeletal Hellknight here. I love the artwork for it, and it was a very sort of a tougher skeletal creature for a group of lower level characters to be going up against. Once they clear out this level, however, they do see that the way to the bottom level has itself also been completely caved in and inaccessible for quite some time. It would take weeks, if not months, to dig out the stairway going down. But they do discover a tunnel that leads from the keep all the way back to town. And when they follow that, they wind up in the cellar of the Pickled Ear, one of the pubs or one of the drinking establishments, taverns in Breach Hill. Once they sort of, discover the connection between the keep and this location, as well as evidence that someone has been going back and forth through seeing footprints and stuff like that through the tunnel. The characters speak with some members of the Pickled Ear staff, particularly its owner, and learn that Voz, again the half-elven owner of the bookstore in town, was the one who was going back and forth. They had sort of reached an agreement where she was able to use those tunnels, and basically Roxy, the owner of the Pickled Ear, just sort of stayed out of her way, sort of thing, because she didn't really like her, was sort of intimidated by her. So just basically didn't want to cause too much of a fuss. This leads the characters to investigating her bookstore, the Reliant Book Company, where they've come across Voz's notes, as well as a map that takes them to a location known as Guardian's Way. It was a location that was sort of important in the Goblin Blood wars that raged there some time ago. It's also a well-known location by the townsfolk, so if the characters aren't quite sure how exactly to get there, people can point them in the right direction. In addition to Voz's notes on the Alcetta's Ring, the teleportation elf gates, and the Guardian's Way, there's also a little bit of information showing her skepticism of the adventurer wizard that helped found the town. Basically calling, the character or the townsfolk idiot humans for trusting the lying wizard, and fools to put up a statue of said wizard in the town. But it doesn't really dive into any more information than that. But again, we will learn more of that as we go along. Making their way to Guardian's Way, the characters encounter some mercenaries that were hired by Voz to sort of act as bodyguards and to protect her from anyone that might come that way. They also come across some interesting spider-like creatures, including this Trixitog, which I will show a picture of a little bit later on, as well as Voz herself and some skeleton companions that she has risen, because she is, in fact, a necromancer. So we have Voz here, and with her defeat, they can, again, try to interrogate her, try to learn some information from her, but they can also go further into the caves and eventually make their way through the caves and into the location housing the Alcetta's Ring, the teleportation gates that the elves had set up many, many, many centuries ago. As they continue their way through the gates, they also come across Renali, a human woman, or apparently a human woman, that is sort of, again, looks very out of place for the location that they're in. And she can also accompany the player characters because she simply wants to get back home, and her home is back in the Mogwani Expanse, which is sort of a jungle region, which is pretty far away from Breach Hill itself. So she is, again, willing to accompany the characters as they go through there. One of the last encounters before getting to the gates itself is with this Greater Barghast. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about him at the end of the summary section, because I did actually run this chapter before basically the pandemic happened and everything sort of shut down. So my characters dealt with this guy in a very, very interesting and kind of probably sort of evil, or at least morally ambiguous way, but we'll touch on that later. The major final encounter takes place in the room with the teleportation gate, or just before it actually, as they see the sort of section here that looks like it's been completely just blasted with fire that's even melted stone, and just caused a great deal of damage. It's also this fiery explosion that occurred here that led to the collapse of the stairwells that have sealed off the different levels of Hellknight Keep. But here they come across the cult leader, at least the leader of the cult on this side of the Elven Gate, Maldorunk, so this Charaka here with some of his bodyguards, including some other Charakas and some Boggart scouts. And on his person, he also has this magical arrowhead trinket, which, when it's brought near to one of the gates, it actually triggers it and activates it, as it's one of the keys to activating the gates. So each gate, there's a series of them. Each one requires a different item to unlock it or activate it. And he had the one to activate one particular gate because that's what these cultists had come through as they came out through this, and they entered the Hellknight Keep from the Mogwani Expanse. So we'll touch more on that in the next installment. But with his defeat, and with the defeat of the Door Warden, this Guardian creature, if they decide to go into that particular room, that is actually the end of the first adventure. So the characters are 5th level by now. And throughout the exploring, they also have the opportunity to discover the deed to Hellknight Keep, and the town council recognizes them as the new rightful owners of the keep itself. So that's actually something that I think is really, really cool. It gives them a base of operations that they definitely worked for over the course of this chapter, but they get it early enough that they can spend some downtime and spend some of their coin to help improve it, to dig out the collapsed stairwells, and just make it their own, which I think is actually really, really cool. So that is the conclusion to the first chapter, Hellknight Hill. So this was the only one that I was able to run when I was running my 2nd edition Pathfinder games at my local game store. Again, they were like once a month thing, and the pandemic sort of put a stop to everything. We still actually can't run at the time I'm recording this, which is the 1st of September. At this point in time, most businesses still can't run events. Like, there's still very strict limits on gathering and stuff like that. So this is something that I am hoping to pick back up. I probably will do it through online games until we get back into in-store stuff. But yeah, so I was actually able to run this chapter. This was the only one I was able to run, so unfortunately I don't have any other personal experience to relate with the rest of the installments. But I'll still try to give my thoughts and suggestions on things to maybe look at or potentially modify based on your own personal opinions. So for me, I think this was a very solid first entry in the campaign. The events did flow relatively well, one into the other. Everything sort of made sense the way that it was done. The only thing that I think kind of bothered me was just the fact that it's convenient that there was only the one group of adventurers coming to Breach Hill for this monthly meeting, and that there was only one issue to be brought up for the town council. Personally, I kind of like the idea of having maybe another group of adventurers that are there as well, and maybe 2 or 3 issues that you sort of just make them as frivolous as you want, and have the main one obviously be the issue that takes place in this particular adventure. But I just feel that it would make the world feel a little bit more realistic. So it's not just like the player characters are the only, it's I guess it reminds me of Star Trek even when they're, near Earth, it's like the Enterprise is the only ship within, distance to actually make a difference, even though it's like the home base sort of thing. So I just think that maybe having just another group of NPC adventurers be there and a couple of other things would sort of help with that. The fire sequence was sort of a hectic one to run, but it was definitely a fun one. The characters essentially have to choose between taking their turns or using their actions to help guide the townsfolk out, or to try to fight the fire, or to try to fight the Mephit. I sort of went with a little bit, made it a little bit easier on the players, where they could use one action to shout directions at a group of nearby townsfolk, and they would make their skill roll, and if they succeeded against the DC that I'd set, it would help move them towards the exit. And each time they did it, they could get, I think I rolled like 1d4 to see how many townsfolk would actually respond. Or you could take, 2 actions, and you could, command a larger group. So the player characters did fairly well. They did a decent job fighting the fire. Unfortunately, of the 40 townsfolk that were in attendance, 3 of them did unfortunately lose their lives due to smoke inhalation and just burns. But it still, was the majority of the people were saved. And when the characters made their way to Hellknight Hill, the keep itself, they cleared out this bottom area first. So they came in through A1, went down through these areas here, and then they made their way into the courtyard, where they had this draconic creature. Oh, which, by the way, I said I was going to show. So let's just get that here. So this is what they fought in the courtyard. That was sort of pacing back and forth underneath the battlements, where the goblins and Calumet were arguing with one another. So they didn't touch this section at all when they, dealt with Calumet, and they did use diplomacy. They were actually able to talk him down. It did take a number of checks to actually fully diffuse the situation, but they did eventually managed to do it. They had him surrounded, and it was basically, brought to his attention that it would be pretty utterly pointless for him to resist any further. And, if he turned himself in, the townsfolk might be merciful on him in passing sentence on him. So they were able to do that. But the goblins, again, they thanked the players. They were willing to tell them of the secret entrance to the lower level in one of the nearby hills. But they did ask the players to clear out the rest of the upper level so that they could rest comfortably and not have to worry about some of the other monsters or animals that have taken up residence attacking them. And the players agreed, and the first location they went into was this room here, A13. They fought the two grave shells, which were the turtle-like creatures that we have back here. So they fought one of those off. They drove one of the other one off using a druid's ability to calm beasts. But then they did something that I didn't, as a DM, I don't want to, sort of reward this type of behavior. So as you can see, there are three different locations. There's three different doorways that can lead to different rooms here. So, A13, A15 is sort of open to each other, but they can access A18, A14, and A16 all from this area. And the group were talked into by one of the players who wasn't one of the individuals opening one of the doors, but they were talked into opening the doors to all three of these locations all at once. And that was a bad idea. I did the whole, are you sure? Are you sure this is what you want to do? And a couple of the locations, I believe, actually had encounters in them. So I just decided that, look, if you're going to be that reckless, especially considering that these are all relatively experienced players. None of them are what I would consider to be rookie players or people that haven't been playing, role-playing games for, at least, 5 to 10 years. And, it's just simple, basic logic that you don't open up several new areas all at once. You try to stick together as a party, but the party was split into opening these different doors. So I had each one trigger an encounter. So there was the warg up in A16. There were giant spiders in A14, and I forget what was in A18. I forget what was in there, but I did have all three of them. I think I just moved one of the encounters from one of the nearby rooms into that one. Based on the sounds that were made by the fights with the grave shells and everything. So it just made sense that things would be attracted to the sound of battle. And the fight was a pretty harrowing one. It was actually pretty tough. So two of the characters were down here fighting the spiders. And the first thing that one of the players did was leave his friend in this room by himself with three giant spiders, and then made it a point to close the door behind him, which really kind of sucked because that's one of your actions, to interact with an object to open the door. And again to close the door. So he did all So he went through. The door was already open, but he basically left his friend there to fight these three spiders by himself, which was kind of a jerk move. And I will admit I did pull some punches when it came to that one, because even though this was sort of a teaching moment, I didn't want the player who wasn't one of the ones to open the door be the one that suffered based on the actions of some of the people that came up with this really bad idea. So anyway, the fight was pretty chaotic, it was pretty hectic, and it took its toll on the player characters for sure. But they were able to overcome it, and from that point on, they decided to take these doors one at a time, which, is obviously a better way of doing things, because as campaign goes on, these creatures that you're going to be fighting, if you're going to be triggering multiple encounters at once, is going to get tougher and tougher and deadlier and deadlier. So it's best that they get the bad ideas out now before it becomes way too difficult to overcome. The rest of the upper level and lower level was pretty uneventful. beyond what was sort of written into the adventure. The characters did actually make friends with Big Bumble. They fed it. They had, again, someone who was good with animals that made some skill checks to actually calm the bear. So the bear sort of started following the player characters around. So that was kind of cool. They also made friends with Pib and Zarf. And went through looting the tombs of these heroes of the Order of the Nail, while Alec, this actual Hell Knight himself, basically just sort of turned his back and did the whole "if I can't see it, it won't kill my brain" sort of thing. Even though they made a huge amount of noise and it was, I don't know, again, it was a pretty fun section there to run overall. The final chapter, the final part of this adventure was sort of, again, where things got really interesting. The fight with Vaz was actually pretty difficult. I will say I did sub out one of her third level spells, I think, for Fireball, because I don't think she had a ton of offensive spells, but she did make some great use of things like Mirror Image and Spider Climb. So it was, again, it was a very fun fight to run with her, and really, it was really difficult. But the player characters were able to subdue her, and they decided not to kill her. Instead, they basically had tied her up and decided that they were going to come back for her later. So they made their way into the area here, which I think was D3, the Goblin God's throne, where this guy was sort of set up on this throne, and he had these goblin skeletons all arranged around him like they were worshiping him. And so he had these weird list of demands that he would make on the player characters. One of the first ones was like things like that they would kneel to him, or that they would bring him. So there was, I can't remember what the second one was. Oh, right. So one of the first things was tribute, which was actually a magic item. And the characters found a magic weapon that none of them were interested in. So they actually offered this magic item as tribute. So it's like, oh, okay. So he, would ask them to, do something else. And I can't remember what the second one was, but the third one was to offer one of their party members as sacrifice. Now, this guy's a little bit insane. He's not quite, all there in the head with it. And the characters actually went back and grabbed Vaz. And they brought her into the throne room. And they offered her to Raladar as tribute. They offered her as sacrifice. And he critically failed his check to detect their bluff, at which the player characters actually critically succeeded. And, Vaz was unable to convince him otherwise, and he devoured her and accepted that as tribute. And at that point, really, what else was I going to do? I didn't want to force the encounter, even though the book kind of recommends that happens. So I decided to just, at that point, he thought that the characters were loyal members of his, of the loyal worshippers of his, and he let them go on. And then they fought with Maldorunk and the other guardians that he had with him. And again, it was a pretty tough fight. His Cinder Claw Gauntlet was one that, on a critical hit, it does like extra fire damage, and it was pretty powerful attacks. Like, this was a very tough character or fight for the player characters, but eventually they were able to defeat him. He even had some pretty awesome spells like Harm, Fireball. So again, it wasn't an easy fight, but the characters were able to defeat him and secure the Elven Gates, the Elven Teleportation Rings, as well as the deed to the keep itself. However, I had to end it right after they defeated Maldorunk and kind of secured the gates. So at the point that I left off, they hadn't actually returned to Breach Hill to complete like everything to be recognized as the rightful owners of Hellknight Keep, although that will be how I start the next session when I do pick this back up. But yeah, it was a ton of fun to run. And honestly, like I said, the only real nitpick that I had was just the first thing with the, like, the characters being the only ones and the only one issue to be brought up. So other than that, I really enjoyed this adventure. The characters will have to find some way to deal with this greater Barghast at some point, because eventually he is going to become a problem, because the characters, eventually he may try to expand his domain, or something will happen. So I definitely want to keep him around and have him reappear at some point later on. The one thing that I sort of had initially as a complaint, and this is a minor spoiler for a later installment, I was initially disappointed by how much of an afterthought Vaz really felt like. She was sort of what drove the story, but she was sort of really not that pivotal to the events that actually took place once the characters got involved. And she wasn't even part of the final encounter, which is something that I was initially going to change. Or if I were to run it again, I was initially going to change and have it so that she was there with Maldorunk, and part of that final encounter. But I will say that the third installment of the series actually does call back to Vaz's involvement. So even though, she wasn't the main villain of this storyline, even though this particular installment, even though it kind of felt like she was set up to be, it is nice to see that she is brought back up later on. So with that knowledge, I would probably keep her exactly where she was, because she does help drive the plot forward in a very important way later on in the campaign. So overall, really enjoyed this adventure, really enjoyed looking at Breach Hill and its history, and I will do a separate video on that as well at some point. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this summary and sort of my experiences with this chapter of the Age of Ashes adventure path. I do wish I would have had the opportunity to run more of them before everything sort of shut down. But I am still looking forward to going through and looking at the rest of these books. And that'll be the subject of videos over the course of the next couple of weeks. So I'll be dedicating them to the Age of Ashes storyline. I wanted to have this all done initially as 7 videos, one back to back. But honestly, I just don't really feel up to that with back issues and other things that have been going on at this point in time. So I'm going to spread them out a little bit more, but it gives me more time to sort of focus on each individual book. So Hellknight Hill was a great adventure to start a group of characters off. Breach Hill is a very interesting location. The cult of the Cinderclaw cult is a very interesting creature or group of to go up against as well. So I really enjoyed their involvement. The Hellknight Keep itself was a nice location to explore, and giving the player characters a base of operations is also something that I always love, because again, you can spend your downtime there, you can spend extra funds there, and just really let the player character sort of make that location their own. So that was my look at Hellknight Hill. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you very much for watching, and hopefully you'll come back when I look at the next installment. So this is part 2 of 6. This is the Cult of Cinders. We'll look at that one next time. Anyway, thanks again for watching. Until then, take care.